FLM, wide open thinking, world-class work, and far-reaching results. Now with locations in Minneapolis, Columbus, Indianapolis, and Washington, D.C. A strategic marketing and communications company dedicated to serving clients who specialize in the business of agriculture and the life of rural communities.
Clayton is always reaching for the stars. He just always believes that this day, when he woke up, he faced the best day of his life. And he has been at the very, very outer extremes of the power system in our country, and it hasn't affected him. He is just the decent, honorable guy that grew up on that farm in Nebraska.
I've always figured that God must have put in the world a bunch of people that are smarter than I am. And in negotiations, success is a combination of smarts and how well prepared you are. So I figured if the other person is going to be smarter than I am, and you better assume that, then you better be prepared to outwork that other person in order to level the playing field at the negotiating table. So that's really been the thrust of my view on this my entire life. I learned a lot of that from my father, who was one of the hardest working people ever on the face of this earth, and my mother was not far behind him. So that was built into me at an early age, and overall I think working that hard has served me well.
Clayton really was the first person who started kicking the door down when it came to agricultural trade. So much of the work that I did was really following in his footsteps. Oftentimes I would sit down and someone would say to me on the other side of the table, Mr. Secretary, do you know Clayton Yeutter?
I don't know of any other cabinet officer who's taken the time and the effort to help his successor move forward. I look back on those years as having Clayton as a true partner.
I'm currently involved in the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations, and a key part of making that agreement come together is market access in Japan. And Clayton's work 30 years ago to open the beef and citrus markets in Japan, the way that he engaged with them to transition those markets and provide greater access, are the starting point for what we're doing today.
Clayton had a huge impact on the WTO. This was Clayton's vision. His belief was that not only would you open up the marketplace to trade, not only would we be able to sell our beef and our pork and other products worldwide, but it would be a system based upon rules.
The Uruguay Round commitments that countries have made in agriculture and the disciplines they've agreed to follow really are the starting point for all of our future negotiations, whether they be trying to get countries to live up to bilateral commitments or entering into new negotiations for a free trade agreement. That's sort of the bedrock we start from, and how those countries have agreed to treat other nations and to abide by a rules-based trading system. And so basically he created the framework that we're building off of as we move forward. And so really the Uruguay Round commitments and the WTO infrastructure is the foundation of our work. So his contribution is really felt every day.
What Clayton taught us is that we were good enough to compete with anyone. That if he, as the negotiator, could open the doors and through a rules-based system establish a level playing field, then he built the confidence in the Nebraska farmer or rancher that we could sell our beef or our corn or our soybeans, wheat, whatever it was, any place in the world as a high-class, high-quality product.
President George H.W. Bush writes of the Clayton Yeutter Institute. The Clayton Yeutter Institute for International Trade and Finance is a wonderful tribute to an individual who has truly had an impact on agriculture on a global scale. Clayton is tough as nails, knowledgeable, energetic, and a friend of agriculture. When I selected Clayton as the 23rd Secretary of Agriculture in 1989, I knew he would fight hard for farming and fair trade. He and his USDA team were responsible for much of the 1990 Farm Bill, moving U.S. farm policy toward greater market orientation. Coupled with the markets which opened during his time as U.S. Trade Representative, his efforts led to an unprecedented expansion of agricultural exports. I have no doubt that future generations of students will greatly benefit from the creation of this new institute and will be able to continue Clayton's legacy of being a game changer in the area of trade and finance.
When I came in, we had the largest trade deficit in this country's history, and there was a great clamor to do something about it. I heard all that commentary as I was going through my Senate confirmation as U.S. Trade Representative, and I was convinced that we had to have a very aggressive trade policy. Jim Baker, who was Secretary of the Treasury and Chairman of the Economic Policy Council at that time, fully agreed, and he wanted to be aggressive in the financial arena as well, and he was. So between the two of us on trade policy and financial policy, we really had an aggressive administration with the leadership of President Reagan at that time.
James A. Baker, former Secretary of the Treasury and Secretary of State, writes, Clayton Yeutter is a first-class example of the model American public servant, a man who always placed his country's best interests above any other consideration. Perhaps his biggest accomplishments occurred when he was U.S. Trade Representative under President Ronald Reagan. His role then was indispensable during the negotiations for the historic 1987 Canada-United States Free Trade Agreement, which sparked the liberalization of trade not only between those two countries, but also around the world. Our nation is stronger because of Clayton Yeutter's service to it.
And if we can create an Institute of International Trade and Finance at the University of Nebraska that will begin to impact the lives of hundreds, if not ultimately thousands of students, then we will have changed the world in the future.
I believe that international trade builds the bridge between the nations and creates peace in the world, and that's where I hope all this knowledge and my skills will come into play. So I definitely want to work in the international trade and agriculture between the United States and Eastern European countries or other countries.
They could take a page from Clayton's book. Not only did he study agriculture, but he got a law degree. And he was in the private sector at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and he came into government. So he has had private sector, business experience, legal training, and government experience.
When the father of the World Trade Organization is a graduate of the University of Nebraska and formerly a very prominent person in our state, it seems to me that it's an extremely appropriate way to recognize him. But it's very, very important that we start getting a significant effort into teaching our students the value of global trade, the value of international relations, and how interlocking these relationships are.
Today we are a world society, and as we interact with different countries and different people, we need to know about their cultures, and so this center will bring all that together and better prepare our students for a career in international agriculture or international activities of one kind or another. It's a great legacy to a great Nebraskan who has been one of our most notable and visible